Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to Kottabos Space Program, where today we are having a look at the Netherdyne Mass Driver mod, which is being made by forum user Norstar1989. And what this glorious little piece of work looks to add into the game is, well, mass drivers. And how could you not love to have one of those? I mean, you now have the ability to basically fire a capsule into orbit without using a rocket, and instead using electromagnetic powers. Or, of course, if you still want the rocket, you could launch the rocket through a mass driver for a little extra oomph, though that is, of course, a bit more dangerous. And this mod's actually existed for the game for quite some time now. In fact, I tried to make a video of this mod years ago when I first started doing mod videos on the channel, and sadly, I wasn't able to get it to work back then, and then it just sort of fell by the wayside. But thankfully, recently I noticed it on the forums picking back up some steam because it did update to the most recent version of the game, and I figured, hey, what a wonderful opportunity to take another look at this thing and hopefully actually get a video out of it. So let's jump into the VAB and grab ourselves a Mark 1-2 command pod for size comparison's sake, and then we're going to go down to the utility tab, which is where all the parts for our beautiful mass drivers, or as the parts are called here, mass accelerators, do live. And one thing I do need to mention before we get into stuff is the models. If I just grab one of these real quick, it is a pretty nice looking model, but something that is going to change, and probably soon. The mod maker is looking for new models for the mod, and I have no idea at what state that search is in. For all I know, the mod could be updated tomorrow with new models, or it could be months from now. I have no clue whatsoever. But whenever the models do update, they still should work under the same principles as we're going to talk today. So whether they look like this or something completely different, hopefully the mechanics should all still work just like I'll show you. So yes, what we have here on this first part is the X10 Mass Accelerator, which is designed for specifically launching small probe parts such as the Octo here, as you can see, because anything that you do want to launch through a mass driver is gonna have to fit inside this ring. For any of you who don't really know what a mass driver is, basically it's a giant electromagnetic gun that's going to take whatever's under it and launch it through each of these coils' magnetic fields. So anything you launch has to fit inside the magnets. So for this particular one, the X10 size, it's going to be for those very, very small probe parts. Now, as we move up, we are going to head to the next, to the X11, which, if we zoom out a bit here, is specifically for more of the 1.25 size. We then have the X12, which is more for the 2.5 size. The X13, which is for 2.5 size stuff that maybe, I don't know, has asparagus staging on the side. And then finally, we skip X14 for some reason and move to the X15. And the X15, oh boy, is really big part, as you can see here, and it's designed for the largest of our rocket parts. If we say go and grab one of the S370-200 tanks and just fit that right in the center, yeah, you can pretty much fit one of those with some asparagus staging around the outside through the X15, because again, remember, anything you launch through a mass driver has to fit inside this tunnel. Definitely always remember that, because if it doesn't fit, it's going to explode. And frankly, I mean, if you have Kerbals on board, you probably don't want that to happen. But as you can see here, we have just, different sizes for whatever sort of ship you are wanting to launch. Whether it's a small, thin probe or a really large freaking vessel, you got options, which is wonderful. Now, if we actually do head back to the utility section, there is something I have to go through here on the power, because not only do each of these different sizes, from the X10 to the X15, provide different sizes of ships that can travel through them, but also they will launch those ships at different power levels. So the bigger the ring, the more power it's going to exert on your ship to launch it. Now, sadly, we've got a huge wall of text on all of these mass accelerators here, talking about the size of things you can send through it and the weight, etc., and even the amount of G's that it'll exert on it. Apparently a mere 60 G's here. Boy, that's liquefying. And yeah, but sadly it doesn't tell us exact stats. I had to actually go into the parts files for these, so I did dig around into the configs for them, guys. The smallest, the X10, will exert 368 kilonewtons of thrust of acceleration on your ship. And here's the important part here. It's going to do that for 0.125 of a second. The acceleration time, or the amount of time it is, spent at that kilonewtons of thrust, is very important, because the larger these go, the same amount of thrust they're going to use, but the longer it goes for. So the X10, again, 368 kilonewtons for 4.125 of a second. The X11 will jump up to 1,471 kilonewtons for 0.25 of a second. The X12, that same exact 1,471 for 0.5 seconds. The 13 will go for, again, 1,471 kilonewtons for 0.75 of a second. And finally, the X15, once more, 1,471, but this one for an entire second, which is a lot of thrust for a lot of time, which could very easily rip apart even the strongest of vessels, which is something to definitely keep in mind. And here's another thing to keep in mind. That thrust, that kilonewtons of thrust, is per ring. So what we have here, you may have noticed we've only got the X10 to the X15, but we've got a lot more parts here than that really should entail. And that's because each size has two parts. We have the Mass Accelerator, which is what you're going to have on the bottom. So you'd have, let's actually just chuck off all these things real quick. And just grab ourselves the X11. I'd say the most standard of these. I tend to use these the most. And this is what you're going to have on the bottom, the Mass Accelerator. We then have a Mass Accelerator Network Unit. And these are what you stack on top of the base Mass Accelerator to increase the power. So every one of these that you stack on here is going to add another 1,471 kilonewtons of thrust for the X11. So yes, that'd be 1,471 times 5. And that is how much power you're going to be exerting on your craft that you are launching. And again, remember, it's got to fit in that tunnel. So that is something you definitely have to keep in mind, and why I stressed that at the beginning, because if we tried to, say, launch a 2.5 meter size ship, technically it would fit through this tunnel, but it's so tight, odds are it's going to explode. That's why this one is really more designed for the 1.25 meter parts, and maybe with a fin or two on them. And you'd want to use the X12 for your 2.5 meter parts, as it gives you a lot more leeway so that your ship doesn't explode before you even really get a chance to use it, which is a very, very good thing. So yes, you use the Mass Accelerator as the base, and then stack on top of them network units to give you more and more power, but at the same time making this tunnel longer and longer, which means more chance of failure. So you're really not going to want to stack like 20 of these things on top of one another, because, well, that just offers a lot more opportunity for explosions, which, again, can be fun unless you have a Kerbal on board. So let's actually look at how these work now. That's the basics of how everything functions, but let's talk now about practical usage. So what I have here is using 3 of the X12 mass accelerators, to launch this tiny little ship down here. And let's just go straight to the launch pad, and I'll explain why I have everything how I have it, as it's kind of important. Now, the first thing is you'll notice that our little ship down here is actually attached by a stack separator. And that is because for our mass driver to actually work, this little ship down here has to be an independent vessel. If we tried to, say, arm right now, because that's how you'd actually get this thing to fire, you arm it and then launch. If we hit this button, we cannot actually arm the mass accelerator because it's not recognizing that there's another ship under it to launch. But if we hit spacebar to stack separate, and then go back to the mass driver, and the reason why I have a Kerbonauts core up here, because it does need some form of control. Now if we hit arm, oh, we have a lot more options. Let's disarm that for now so we don't accidentally fire while we talk about a couple other things. So again, you have to have your ship be an independent entity, and you're going to want it to launch from as central of a position as possible. So it is a possibility for you to, say, roll a ship under here, or I've actually launched rovers before, which is hilarious. You just kind of drive them right under and then launch them good, but you just want to make sure your ship is central and also distinct, unique, and separate from your mass driver. And then, of course, for your mass driver, so you can control it, you will want some form of command pod or probe core, something along those lines, or else it's not going to work. Now, the reason I went with this particular probe core is because it has 1,000 electric charge, and this is something I haven't talked about yet. This is going to use electric charge when you fire it. And if you don't have enough electric charge, it won't get the full amount of acceleration force. Now remember, this one is using, as it says here, 1,471 kilonewtons of force. And if we launched right now, it would actually use all 1,000 of this electric charge, but it would be enough to get that full force. But say we didn't have the full 1,000. We could actually drop this down to, say, around 50%, but now it's only going to do 735.5 kilonewtons of force per coil. Again, that is per coil. And so it'll use less power, but that also means your ship isn't going to go as far. And so that's sort of the balancing act you have to do in this particular mod. The more coils you have at 100%, the more electric charge it's going to use. And so you may want, if you have, say, a 6-coil stack here, to maybe only launch it at 35% or 76, whatever it would be best for you to use. But at 100%, this thing should be good to go. So what we do to actually fire is, again, we arm it, and it is going to launch at 100% power. And you'll notice now that we have hit armed, we have 3 options. We can either disarm it once again like we did before. We can also fire the ship immediately and just have it launch into the air, or we can start a countdown. And personally, I love the countdown because it's counting down from 10 seconds, which gives you plenty of time to actually get back to your ship and prepare for launch, which should happen any moment now. And there we go, we've been launched into the air. Now that 3-coil mass driver is nowhere near enough for us to actually get into space. And I think, yeah, we're already decelerating. We probably only got to about 25 kilometers maximum there. But in reality, we're not going to go very far at all. And that is with the full power of 3 coils. Now, like I said earlier, if you can't get into space but you have a fully built rocket, you could, say, perhaps activate your engine and try and make it the rest of the way. Now, this thing definitely won't with that crappy little engine, but it is a possibility. So you could get more oomph to help you out with your launch of your ship. and then just, get the rest of the way there with rocket power, which is always fun. But let's actually revert flight back to the launch, and let's actually launch it again, but let's watch that power consumption that I did mention. So let us separate, because again, we can't arm if we don't. Go to our mass driver, open up our energy, and let's only launch it actually at about 50%, so you can see how much of the energy will go down. And we're gonna arm, and we're just gonna fire it right away. There you go. So actually, 1,000 isn't even enough. I probably should have been firing this thing at maybe about 60% or so for us to use all the power. Because one thing on this, once it reaches how much power it has in the batteries, it's just going to cut off the kilonewtons of force right there. Oh, there's the separator. Oh boy. And I've actually found in my launches that if you are trying to force it at a higher power level, but it doesn't have the power, it actually tends to be less efficient than if you find the sweet spot of the power level for using exactly what you have in the battery. So you want to try and use the whole battery and nothing more to get the most efficiency. Now let's actually revert this thing back to the vehicle assembly building and grab our next one, which of course is the Mass Driver 2, which is the same X12, but we have 6 rather than 3 mass drivers on this thing. So just to show you, again, the power consumption on this thing, let's release our little ship. And if we launch this at 100%, that's actually going to be probably bad for us. In fact, it may rip apart the ship because it's going to try and bring out more power than it really has. So let's arm, start countdown, and let's head back here and see what it'll do. Now again, it's not going to have anywhere near enough electric charge to actually fire it properly all the way through. But there we go, we actually did get a pretty good launch out of it. It didn't explode it, which is always a good thing. And let's look at the map, and we actually did get more altitude. So we probably got around 38 kilometers there, roughly, before we started decelerating, which is good. That did get us a higher altitude, because again, it is spending more time, or rather, well, it's using more power between all of those different coils, even though it's still using the same 1,000 electric charge. So once more, just an oddity about this thing. You're going to have to experiment with the number of coils you have, the power levels, etc. But we actually probably could get more height. I'm only going to do maybe one more launch. Let's try launching it at about, I don't know, maybe 60% and see. Ooh, oh, yep, I need to release it first. There we go. I always forget that. And let's just fire it good. There we go, and quickly jump back to it. Now this one, we really didn't get the fire effect, so I doubt we're actually going to get that much higher. Yeah, in fact, it didn't even go 16,000 at dropping that power level. So yeah, it's just, again, something you really have to experiment with. Now let's actually, again, revert to the vehicle assembly building and grab our number 3 mass driver, which is the big boy, X15. We've only got 4 of these, but, yeah, it's gonna rip this thing apart. I already know that for a fact. If we launched at 100%, let's release there, go to launch and arm, start countdown, and in 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're dead. Because again, it's trying to do that huge amount of 1,471 kilonewtons of thrust for longer. So that means more time for it to heat up and more time to do damage, and it looks like we had the engine survive and the separator. Good times. But if we go back to launch and say lower the power down to something more reasonable, we can still use this thing perfectly well, as with the others. Say at about, let's do 20%. That should be fun. Do the arming, and we'll just go ahead and fire this baby. There we go. Still getting the heat for quite some time. And up to there, we were able to get it almost to 50 kilometers by just lowering down the amount of power that it was using. Because again, when it tries to use more power than it can use, it'll become less efficient, which is just an oddity of the whole system that you'll have to learn. So again, it's all about experimentation. Learn which coils you want to use and what count of how many and what power level you want to use it at. And you'll have to play around with it a lot, but once you do figure it all out, this is an amazing system that when you have it right, can easily get things into space. And I've just been firing this stuff, straight up. You can very easily, make a whole rigged up system to have this at an angle, so when you fire it, you can potentially actually get it into an orbit. But again, it's just all about that experimentation, which is the fun of this mod, I think. So if you would like to try this mod out for yourself, and I definitely say to give it a go, because it is a hilariously good time. And again, who doesn't want a mass driver? You can go and take a look at the link in the description to find the download. And yeah, definitely have fun with it, play around, launch some ships using magnets, and have a wonderful time. And of course, I do hope you have enjoyed this video today, and that you do come back for the next win. Hopefully, we'll be looking at yet another wonderful mod. But until that time, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good one!